In every forgotten village, buried beneath centuries of silence, there are rituals still performed, not for the living, but for what waits beyond the veil. This is FolkFear, where ancestral soil hides unspeakable bargains, and joy is only the mask that horror wears. We gather cursed legends and forbidden rites, whispered through generations, carried by wind, shadow, and blood. Tonight, we journey to a place the maps no longer mark, a village where red lanterns glow without flame and wedding drums echo for the dead. Welcome to Shuangxi Village, where silence is sacred, smiles are sown, and brides are never seen again. This is the story of the red teeth of Shuangxi Village. Listen closely, but whatever you do, don't say, "I do." The train wound through a fog-drenched countryside, cutting across fields that hadn't seen the sun in days. Mist clung to the windows like breath, blurring the trees into silhouettes. Yanlin pressed her forehead to the glass, watching the landscape fold inward, as if the world itself were holding a secret. She hadn't been back to Shuangxi in over 10 years. The conductor's voice crackled overhead, announcing her stop in that peculiar dialect only spoken in the southern valleys. Shuangxi, double happiness. A name that always sounded too cheerful, too fortunate for a village that had never truly felt like home. Her mother was dead. That was the reason she'd returned. Not nostalgia, not love, just duty. Yanlin stepped off the train and immediately felt it. The air was heavier here. Not humid, not hot, just full, as though the village breathed in slow, expectant rhythms. A red paper lantern swayed above the old station platform, tethered to a wooden beam by a frayed string. It had no candle inside, but it glowed faintly, unnaturally, as if lit by memory. She frowned. The taxi that met her was a rusted van with no license plate and a driver who spoke in whispers. He didn't ask her name. He didn't need to. Everyone knew who she was. As they drove deeper into the village, the lanterns multiplied. They lined the roads like sentinels, hanging from trees, doors, poles, and even graves. Some danced in the breeze, others remained perfectly still. Not one had a visible flame, yet they glowed, warm, red, eternal. Shuangxi hadn't changed. The same cobbled streets, the same clay-tiled rooftops, the same faint scent of incense and dried blood that lingered no matter the season. But something had changed. She could feel it in the way the villagers looked at her. Not with curiosity, but with reverence, like she was someone sacred or cursed. A woman sweeping her front porch paused as they passed. She smiled at Yanlin, wide and tight, her lips painted red, her eyes unreadable. A group of children played by a shrine, bouncing red balls that left no echo when they hit the ground. One of them stopped and whispered to the others, "The bride has returned." Yanlin flinched. "What did you say?" But the children giggled and ran. The taxi stopped in front of her childhood home, a 2-story wooden house with a sagging roof and a gate carved with peach blossoms. Her mother's house, now hers, a place once full of arguing, altars, and the smell of bitter herbs. On the front door, someone had hung a crimson banner with the character Shuangxi, double happiness, painted thick in ink so dark it looked almost black. Yanlin's stomach turned. She hadn't arranged any funeral decorations. No one had called her to plan anything. She hadn't even decided where to bury her mother. But here it was, a celebration. Before she could step out, the driver turned and said his first words, "Don't blow out the lanterns, even by mistake." Yanlin froze. "Why?" He didn't answer. He just drove away. The front door creaked open. A man stood in the doorway, tall, wiry, with a kindly face aged by sorrow. Uncle Yao, her mother's cousin, one of the few people in the village who had ever treated her like more than a burden. "Yanlin," he said softly, "you came back, just in time." She looked past him into the house. Red streamers lined the walls. A table had been set with tea, pastries, and sticks of incense. An altar stood at the center, and beside it, a porcelain figure dressed in groom's robes. "What is all this?" "Is a homecoming and a farewell." His voice trembled. Yanlin stepped inside. The air was thick with sandalwood and something sweeter, almost like syrup or rot. In the center of the altar lay her mother's urn. It was sealed with red wax. "No," she whispered. "She never wanted this. She wanted to be buried, not burned." Uncle Yao avoided her eyes. "She changed her mind before the end. Said she needed to be closer to the family. Said she needed to protect you." From the hallway came the rhythmic thump of a drum, slow, repeating, like a heartbeat underwater. "What is that?" Uncle Yao's lips thinned. "It begins tonight." Yanlin's heart raced. "What begins?" But he walked away without answering. She wandered through the house, the scent of ash and roses lingering behind every door. Her childhood bedroom was untouched. The same posters, the same books, even the same broken music box on the shelf. And on her pillow, someone had placed a red silk veil. Yanlin picked it up, her hands shaking. Beneath it, strands of hair, her own, tied in a knot with red thread. She ran to the window. Outside, villagers were hanging lanterns from the branches of the old ginkgo tree. They moved in silence, in pairs, each one bowing before placing their light. The tree shimmered with 100 red orbs. It looked like a tree of bleeding eyes. She slammed the window shut. That night she couldn't sleep. The drums never stopped. In the distance, flutes joined in, mournful, celebratory, wrong. At midnight, someone knocked on the door, 3 times, soft, polite. Yanlin didn't answer, but from her window she saw a paper effigy standing in the yard, dressed in red, its face blank, its hands folded in prayer. And beside it, someone had drawn footprints in red paint leading from the shrine to her door. She turned on every light in the house, lit every candle, and sat on her bed, gripping a pair of scissors. The air grew colder. Outside, the lanterns glowed brighter. She thought she heard chewing, soft at first, then closer. By morning, the effigy was gone. Yanlin stepped outside into a world painted red. Ribbons fluttered from trees. Crimson paper cutouts of phoenixes and dragons clung to doorways. Even the stray dogs wore scraps of silk tied like collars. It wasn't mourning, it was celebration. She wandered down the narrow path to the village square, heart pounding behind her ribs. The drums had stopped only an hour before dawn, and yet the air still throbbed with something rhythmic, like footsteps just beneath the earth. The villagers were preparing for a festival. Tables were being set with bowls of sticky rice, steamed buns shaped like lotus flowers, and long strands of red noodles. Lanterns hung from every post, and children darted through alleyways with tiny red flags. She was met with smiles. Always smiles. "Welcome home, Yanlin," said a woman with a basket of dyed eggs. "You've arrived just in time for the double happiness." A man she didn't recognize tipped his hat and offered her a sweet. "Congratulations." "For what?" she asked. He just smiled wider. Yanlin turned, seeking the only person she might trust, Uncle Yao. She found him near the old well, overseeing the lighting of ceremonial incense. He looked tired, older than he had yesterday. "I need to know what's going on. What is this festival? What are they celebrating?" He didn't answer at first. Then quietly he said, "A union." Her breath caught. "A wedding?" He nodded. Her voice cracked. "Who's getting married?" A long silence. Then, "You." The words did not register, not at first. They hovered in the air, meaningless and absurd. She shook her head. "No, that's not possible. There's been a mistake." "There's no mistake," he said gently. "You are the last daughter of your mother's line. The blood must bind with the dead. It is the way." Yanlin's skin went cold. "You think I'm going to marry a ghost?" "Not a ghost," Uncle Yao corrected. "A protector." He gestured toward the mountains. "Long ago, the village made a pact. In exchange for fortune, rain, and long life, we offer a bride when the line thins." Yanlin laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You're joking. This is some old ritual, some myth." "No myth," he whispered. "It has teeth." She stepped back, heart thudding. "I'm not staying. You've already been chosen." The villagers gathered in the square as the sun dipped low. Someone began beating the drum again, a deep, resonant boom that vibrated through bone. Yanlin turned to flee, to get her phone, to call someone, anyone, but her feet felt unsteady. She reached into her pocket and found red threads sewn into the lining of her coat. When had that happened? "Yanlin!" The voice came from behind the incense stand. She turned. It was Lifen, her childhood friend. She looked thinner, her hair braided tightly and covered with a red scarf. Her eyes were wild, darting around as though afraid to be seen. "Meet me behind the shrine tonight, before the drums stop," she whispered, then vanished into the crowd. Night fell like a curtain, sudden and suffocating. Yanlin waited until the village feasts had begun, until the wine poured and the elders clapped to songs no one seemed truly to enjoy. Then she slipped away through the side alley, behind the herbal shop, her footsteps swallowed by the hum of celebration. The shrine loomed ahead, small, wooden, ancient. It housed the ancestral tablets of the village, each one etched with names worn thin by time. Incense burned in a copper urn, curling upward like ghostly fingers. Lifen was waiting. "Quick," she hissed, grabbing Yanlin's wrist. "They'll notice if you're gone too long." "Tell me what this is, all of it. No riddles, no cryptic warnings. I need the truth." She hesitated, then spoke in a trembling voice. "It's not a wedding, not really. It's an offering. Every few generations, when the red teeth stir, the village offers a bride from the bloodline that first betrayed it." Yanlin blinked. "Betrayed what?" Lifen looked toward the trees. "There was once a guardian spirit, a Taoist protector, bound to the temple who kept the village safe. But during a wedding long ago, the bride, a maiden of the founding family, ran away. She broke her vow, left the altar empty. The spirit turned, twisted. Now he wakes hungry." "And my mother?" Yanlin whispered. She was supposed to be the last, but she begged, traded years of her life so you could be free. But the spirit does not forget, nor do the elders. They've been preparing since the day you left." Yanlin felt the air shift. The drums grew louder. "It's too late," Lifen said. "They've already begun the rites. Your blood has already been tasted." "No," Yanlin whispered. "There has to be a way." "There was," Lifen said, "but I failed." She followed her gaze. Lifen's hands were bleeding. Thin red lines cut across her palms, symbols carved into her skin, smudged and raw. Her wrists bore waxy scars. "They tried to make me a bride, but I wasn't of the blood. I lasted 3 nights before they dragged me back." Yanlin stared at her, horrified. "Why are you helping me?" "Because I remember the real you, the girl who gave me her coat when I had none. I remember how your mother looked when they took her. She screamed your name." From deep within the forest, a wind blew, carrying with it the scent of sandalwood and something darker, something iron. "They're coming," she whispered. "Go back to the house. Lock the doors. Don't let them find you outside after the 3rd drum." Yanlin ran, through the alleys, past the glowing lanterns, past smiling villagers who sang songs through mouths that didn't quite move right. She reached the house just as the 3rd drum sounded, louder than thunder. She slammed the door shut and bolted it, every hair on her arms standing on end. Outside, laughter echoed. She moved toward the window, heart hammering, and peeked through the curtains. The street was empty. No footsteps, no shadows. Only red lanterns, swaying, glowing, grinning, and one single figure in the distance. Tall, unmoving. A man dressed in groom's robes, face hidden beneath a red veil. He raised his hand and pointed to her window. Yanlin stumbled back, fell to the floor, and crawled into the shadows. The lanterns never dimmed. The next morning, sunlight filtered weakly through red-tinted windows. The color stained everything: walls, floor, even the steam rising from the kettle. It was as though the village itself bled light instead of reflecting it. Yanlin sat in silence at the kitchen table, watching the porcelain teacup tremble slightly in her hand. Her sleep had been shallow, fractured by dreams she couldn't quite remember. Only one image clung to her waking mind: a bride in red, her mouth sealed with wax, reaching toward Yanlin with stitched fingers. Across from her sat Uncle Yao, calm as always, folding paper cranes with red ink-stained hands. "You didn't sleep," he said, without looking up. "There was a man outside my window, in wedding robes." Yanlin placed her cup down slowly. "For what?" "For the rites to be complete." She leaned forward. "What exactly are these rites?" He finally looked up. His face was tired, but there was something else behind his eyes now, something distant, hollow. "There are 3 parts," he said. "The binding, the dressing, the joining." He gestured toward the altar in the next room. The porcelain effigy still sat there, unmoving, yet somehow more present than before. "Last night, the binding began. The spirit marks its bride. You may have felt it in your blood, your breath, your bones." Yanlin didn't speak, but her heart sank. She had woken with scratches on her collarbone, symbols she hadn't placed. Her breath still felt shallow, her tongue heavier. Uncle Yao stood and crossed the room. He opened an old trunk tucked beneath the family altar and withdrew a long, thin box wrapped in rice paper. He unwrapped it reverently. Inside lay a wedding robe, crimson, embroidered with golden threads, beautiful and wrong. Its silk shimmered unnaturally, as if alive. Yan Lin felt her stomach twist just looking at it. "This was your mother's," he said, "and her mother's, and her mother's." He held it toward her. Yan Lin didn't move. "I'm not putting that on." "It's not a choice," he said softly. "The village has chosen. The altar has chosen. You are the last daughter of the line." She backed away. "No!" Uncle Yao didn't argue. He simply folded the robe carefully and placed it in her arms. It burned against her skin. Later, she walked alone to the village temple, an act of defiance she wasn't sure she could afford, but she had to understand what this all meant, where it began, how deep it ran. The temple was small and half swallowed by the mountain's edge. Its stone lions were worn smooth by time. Red paper talismans fluttered at the entrance, and the incense smoke inside was thick enough to choke. An old woman knelt before the altar, murmuring prayers in a dialect Yan Lin barely remembered. As she stepped inside, her gaze caught on a glass case tucked in the corner. Inside sat a porcelain groom, nearly life-sized, dressed in ceremonial robes identical to the figure on her family's altar. His face was painted delicately, with a faint, unreadable smile. But his teeth, they were red. Not painted, not stylized, but actual red, like lacquered bone. Yan Lin stepped closer. The plaque beneath read, "Guardian of Shuangxi, the wedding watcher. Do not speak to him. Do not dream of him. Do not answer when he calls." She felt a cold pressure on her chest, like someone was pushing inward just enough to steal her breath. "His eyes used to be gold," the old woman said, behind her. "Now they're empty." Yan Lin turned. "What is it?" "The spirit we once worshipped. He was our protector, until someone broke the vow. Now he waits for the blood to return." Yan Lin's voice cracked. "Why keep the tradition? Why feed him?" The old woman smiled with rotted teeth. "Because he protects the village. Because the crops grow. Because no child here dies before their time. One bride every few generations is a small price." The words made Yan Lin sick. As she left the temple, she passed a wall of red paper notes, prayers, names, petitions. She stopped when she saw her own name written there, repeated several times in the same spidery handwriting. Yan Lin, Yan Lin, Yan Lin. Next to it, drawn in dark red ink, was the symbol for bride. Back at the house, she found her mother's old mirror covered in silt. Curious, she pulled it off. Her reflection was wrong. Her face stared back, but her eyes were too still. Her lips slightly parted, as if whispering. Her hand moved, a second slower than her real one. Then her reflection smiled. Yan Lin dropped the cloth and covered the mirror again. She began searching the house. Every drawer, every box, every shelf. She needed something, anything, to make sense of this madness. In her mother's old chest, she found a journal. The last pages were torn out, but one remained. It read, "They promised you you would be free, but they lied. It's in the blood. You are the key. If you feel him in your dreams, do not let him kiss you. The wax, it seals more than mouths. It seals souls." Yanlin's hands trembled. That night, she locked every door, nailed the windows shut, and laid salt in a circle around her bed, an old superstition her grandmother used to mutter about. She didn't sleep, not at first. But eventually, the drums lulled her into that gray place between waking and dreaming. And there he was, the man in red. No eyes, no shadow, but smiling. He held out a wax seal and pressed it to her lips. "Say nothing," he whispered. "Smile wide. You've already said I do."
Yanlin awoke, gasping. Her hand flew to her mouth. No wax, no seal, no blood. But the sensation lingered, that strange, cloying weight pressing against her lips, as if something had melted into her skin during sleep. She stumbled to the bathroom and splashed water over her face. Her reflection in the mirror shuddered slightly, lagging again behind her real movements. Her mouth looked normal, but inside her cheeks, her tongue felt swollen, numb, as if her voice had been touched. She tried to speak, just one word. Nothing came out, not a sound. Panic shot through her chest. She tried again, still nothing. Her lips moved, her throat strained, but her voice had vanished. Yanlin clawed open her notebook and scrawled furiously, "I can't speak. Something's wrong. Something sealed me." She tore the page and shoved it into Uncle Yao's hands when he knocked. He read it without surprise. "You dreamt of him, didn't you?" he asked softly. She nodded. "You let him touch your lips?" Her hands shook. "I didn't let him. He did it anyway." Uncle Yao closed his eyes. "Then the silence has begun." He led her back into the main room and lit 2 sticks of incense. The porcelain groom still sat on the altar, now flanked by bowls of fruit, bundles of joss paper, and, disturbingly, a pair of crimson wax seals shaped like lips. "I warned your mother," Uncle Yao murmured, "but she thought she could change it, thought love could undo tradition." He looked at Yanlin. "But silence is the first vow. Once you stop speaking, the spirit begins to feed, not on flesh, not yet, but on your will." Yanlin pointed desperately at her throat. Her breathing was tight, not painful, but restricted, like a slow tightening of thread through skin. Uncle Yao poured her a cup of bitter black tea. "It may return your voice if you resist, but you must not dream again, not of him." She sipped the tea and grimaced. It tasted like burnt wax and roots. That afternoon, she ventured out. She needed to find Lai Fen. The village was even more decorated than before. Red silk now blanketed every door. Wedding symbols painted in thick strokes adorned the pavement. And everywhere she turned, people were smiling, wide, silent, unnatural smiles. Some of them nodded to her, lips unmoving. Others simply bowed. A young boy ran past her, holding a candle shaped like a bride. He didn't make a sound, Not even his feet hit the ground. Everything felt muted, like sound had become forbidden. Yanlin's footsteps were the only ones that echoed. She reached Lai Fen's house and knocked. No answer. She pushed the door open. Inside, the home was cold and dark. Dust lay thick on every surface. Candles had melted down into the floor. And in the center of the living room sat an empty chair facing a wall covered in drawings, all in red ink. Each one showed a woman in a bridal gown, each one with no mouth. On the table sat a bowl of wax, still warm. A single strand of black hair floated in it, hair that looked exactly like Lai Fen's. Yanlin backed away. On the door behind her, someone had carved a single character. Silent. That night, the dreams returned. No matter how tightly she wrapped herself in salt, how bitter the tea, how tightly she shut her eyes, he came. The man in red. He stood at the edge of the forest this time, framed in lantern light. His head was tilted, his smile wider. "You're almost ready," he said, voice blooming in her skull. So beautiful in red. She tried to scream and felt nothing. No breath, no sound, just a wet pressure in her throat. He stepped closer. "Your silence is sacred. It means you accept. It means you belong to me." She ran, through trees that moved like fabric, through fog that tasted like incense and blood. Behind her, the sound of chewing. Soft, rhythmic, closer. She jolted awake with blood in her mouth. Her gums were bleeding. A small piece of red wax stuck to her lower lip. She ripped it off, but it left a blister beneath. In the mirror, her reflection stared blankly, then blinked out of sync, a second too late. She tried to speak again. This time, a sound emerged. Not a word, not a scream, a laugh. High, hollow, not hers. She clamped her hands over her mouth. Somewhere outside, the wedding drums began again. Slower, louder, welcoming. The next morning, the wax was gone from her lips. Her voice had returned, fragile, scratchy, like the last breath before drowning, but it was there. Yanlin whispered her own name just to hear it. It barely filled the space of the room. Yan. Lin. It didn't sound like hers anymore. Her reflection mimicked the motion, a heartbeat too late. She stopped looking at mirrors after that. Uncle Yao was in the kitchen, brewing another pot of that bitter tea. He poured 2 cups without looking at her and said, "You dreamt of him again." She nodded slowly. "He sealed you." I touched her lip. I pulled it off. "That was your mistake," she said gently. "The seal isn't wax, it's will. You broke it too soon. Now he's closer." Yanlin sat at the table and wrapped her fingers around the cup. She said, "I want answers, not riddles, not parables, the truth." Uncle Yao stared at the steam between them. Then, as if something in him cracked, he nodded. "This story begins before the founding of Shuangxi, before the village had a name. There was a guardian, a spirit born of Taoist blood and sacred vows. His purpose was to protect the living from what sleeps beneath." Beneath? The mountain, the trees, the soil. There is something old here, hungrier than the earth should be. He continued, voice soft. "One day, a temple maiden was chosen to marry the guardian. It was symbolic,
a ritual to anchor the protection. But she fled. On the night of the wedding, she ran into the forest and never returned. Yan Lin felt her chest tighten. The guardian turned, and he turned on us.
What does this have to do with me?
Uncle Yao looked at her then, with eyes full of apology. She was your ancestor, the one who broke the vow. Yan Lin stood up so fast the chair screeched.
No!
He held up a folded piece of parchment. It was old, fragile, inked with the family tree. Her mother's name, her grandmother's name, her great-grandmother's name, all connected by a single bloodline, traced back to the missing bride. You are the last daughter of that line, the last bride. The pact is renewed with each generation. Your mother delayed it, but she couldn't destroy it. Yan Lin stepped away, shaking her head.
No, that's not my burden. That's not my fate.
The village survives because of this ritual. The crops, the water, the health, the quiet. Every generation, one daughter keeps the peace.
And they all die?
He didn't answer.
They all get eaten, don't they?
His silence was confirmation. Yan Lin laughed, sharp, bitter, unhinged.
You're telling me I'm just meat wrapped in silk to feed some ancient promise?
No, he said softly. You're a bride. That made it worse. Later that day, she wandered the edges of the village, looking for exits, for gaps, for something. But the roads were gone. The paths that once led to the highway were blocked with stone, overgrown. Lanterns now hung along the forest's edge like warnings. Every trail curved back toward the shrine. It was as if the village had swallowed itself, closed off behind her. The only way out was deeper in. Yan Lin sat by the dried riverbed where she used to skip stones as a girl. She closed her eyes. The wind carried faint laughter, a woman's, then silence, then chewing, soft, closer. She opened her eyes and saw Li Fen standing in the distance, barefoot, her dress damp with dew.
Li Fen?
She called. Her friend didn't move.
Li Fen?
She stood up and walked slowly toward her. Li Fen turned. Her mouth had been sealed, not with wax, but with stitches. Black thread ran across her lips, sewn tight. Tears ran down her cheeks. Behind her, the trees seemed to lean closer, as if they were listening. Yan Lin reached out.
Who did this to you?
Li Fen opened her hand and pressed something into Yan Lin's palm before vanishing between the trees. It was a torn scrap of paper, a map, crude, hand-drawn, a path leading behind the ancestral shrine, a circle marked bed. Underneath it, one word, hollow. That night, she packed a small bag, flashlight, knife, rope, and waited until the wedding drums quieted, until the village fell into that strange, smiling silence. Then she slipped out. The shrine was lit with only 2 lanterns now, one red, one white. Funerary colors, life and death, the veil between. Behind the shrine, the forest thickened fast, but the map guided her down a winding trail lined with rotting fruit and paper prayers nailed to trees. Eventually she reached it, a mound, shaped like a bed, draped in vines, cradled by roots, and carved with floral wedding symbols nearly faded by time. She stepped forward, the air shifted. Below her feet was hollow earth. She knelt. The dirt here was fresh, recently disturbed. She dug, not deep,
just enough to see it. A body, a woman in red, her lips sealed, her eyes open. And beside her, a porcelain groom, smiling with red teeth. Yan Lin screamed. No sound escaped. Her voice was gone again. She stumbled back to the village in silence, her legs shaking, her hands caked in dirt. She made it home before sunrise and found Uncle Yao waiting at the door. "I saw it," she whispered. He didn't ask what. He simply said, "Now you understand why the silence is sacred."
Yan Lin no longer dreamed of anything else. He came every night now, the man in red, always standing at the edge of her vision, tall, still, wrapped in crimson robes that whispered like silk dragged across bone. His face remained veiled, but when he spoke, the words bloomed inside her skull, echoing beneath thought. "You are almost ready. The silence suits you. Soon you will smile." She never saw his eyes, only the teeth. Dozens of them, rows behind rows, red as lacquer, red as blood. Teeth that did not belong in a human mouth. She'd wake choking on nothing, her pillow wet with sweat or sometimes tears, but sometimes blood. Her gums bled more often now. Each time she brushed her teeth, something small would come loose, a thread, a sliver, once even a tiny piece of red wax caught between her molars. She could barely eat. She couldn't scream. And worst of all, she wasn't afraid in the same way anymore. She was starting to recognize the rhythm, the sequence, the preparation. She was starting to remember. On the 7th night since her return, she found a package on the table. No name, wrapped in red silk. Inside, a comb, a pair of jade earrings, and a small jar of red pigment. Wedding gifts. She didn't touch them, not until sunset. Then, without knowing why, she lifted the comb and ran it through her hair. 1 stroke, 2, 3. Each time a memory returned. 1, her mother's hands brushing her hair and humming a tune she hadn't heard since childhood. 2, a red curtain drawn over her crib, the scent of incense too strong for a nursery. 3, the night she turned 7, and a man in red stood outside her window, while the villagers smiled and said, "She's so lucky, chosen so early." The comb dropped from her hands. She collapsed to the floor and wept, soundless. The next morning, the villagers were waiting outside her house, all of them, dressed in ceremonial red, smiling. Some held candles, some held lotus flowers, some held wax seals, their hands sticky with it, warm like blood. Uncle Yao stood at the front. He said, "Today is the dressing." "I'm not going anywhere," she rasped, her voice barely audible. But they didn't need to touch her. The house changed around her, as if it was never a house at all, but a bridal chamber hidden in wood. The walls melted into silk, the windows shut of their own accord. And suddenly, she was standing before a mirror. Not the cracked one in her room, but an old one, round and silver, mounted above a basin of water. She didn't want to look, but her reflection turned on its own. It was her, and it wasn't. Her eyes were wider,
Her lips were painted crimson, her smile stretched too far, too calm, too empty. Behind her in the reflection stood the man in red, veil lifted. Rows of red teeth gleamed like wet rubies. No eyes, just empty sockets filled with darkness that felt like heat. And he whispered, "Now you see what I see. Now you wear the face I love. Now you are mine." She turned, but no one was there. Just the mirror, just the room, just the wedding robe laid across her bed. She ran again, out into the village square. No one stopped her because no one moved. They were all frozen, mid-step, mid-smile, even the dogs, even the trees. She screamed, and the air swallowed the sound whole. She ran through the back alleys, past the shrine, back to the burial mound, to the wedding bed made of earth and root. She began to dig again, bare hands, no hesitation. But this time, there was no body. The porcelain groom was gone. In its place, a second robe, crimson, and a mirror embedded in the dirt. She looked down and saw herself, smiling, a wax seal already pressed to her lips. She staggered back and collapsed, breath heaving. Footsteps approached. She looked up. Lai Fen, barefoot, pale. The stitches were gone from her mouth, but her lips didn't part. Instead, she breathed the words, "He's inside the blood now. You can't run. You carry the vow." Yan Lin reached out, begging for help. Lai Fen shook her head. "I tried to fight too. I tried to flee. But the line doesn't break. It bends. And you are the final knot." Then she vanished, not into the forest, but into the ground, swallowed without a sound. That night, back in her room, the robe was waiting on the bed, folded, heavy, breathing. Yan Lin turned every light on. She opened every window. She played music from her phone, loud and desperate. But the drums still began, low, slow, beating in time with her heart. Boom, boom, boom. And under the sound, the chewing. Soft, then closer.
Yan Lin couldn't stop scratching her arms. The sensation had started as a tingle beneath the skin, then an itch, then a burn. She stood in front of the mirror, sleeves rolled up, tracing the faint patterns now emerging along her forearms, lines, symbols, etched in red like ink rising from within. Wedding charms. The kind her grandmother once painted on the backs of ceremonial fans. Except these weren't drawn. They were growing. She hadn't left the house in 2 days. Every time she stepped outside, the village changed. Streets folded into each other. The ginkgo tree moved locations. The shadow shifted too slowly. Lanterns turned to face her. Even the birds were gone. No sound, just wind and drums. Boom, 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 no matter the hour. She began to notice the red threads everywhere now, woven into her blankets, wrapped around the legs of her chair, trailing from the altar to the bathroom door, even from her own fingers as she slept. She tried cutting them. They grew back by morning. One evening, she wandered the house barefoot, floor cold beneath her steps, salt circle long since smudged and useless. A trail of thread led beneath the altar. She knelt,
The floorboards looked normal, but when she pressed her ear to the wood, she heard whispering. Not words, not even voices, just movement, like silk on skin, teeth on bone. She pried up the boards. Beneath them, packed earth, soft and damp, and under that, stone, ancient, cracked. She dug until her nails split. And then she found it, a hatch, wooden, old, marked with Taoist seals now faded beyond recognition. She hesitated, then lifted it. The smell rose up first, earth, incense, and something metallic. Below, a staircase carved into dirt, narrow and spiraling, lit faintly by lanterns that had no flame. She descended. Each step seemed to pull sound away from her. Even her own breathing disappeared. At the bottom, a tunnel. Walls lined with bones, not stacked, not buried, arranged. Hands clasped in prayer, skulls smiling toward the center. And in the heart of it all, a room, round, hollow, a bed. It was carved directly into the stone, shaped like a traditional wedding platform, complete with headboard, silken canopy, and hanging charms swaying with no wind. And on it, something lay covered, a shroud of red. Yanlin stepped closer, hands trembling. She reached out and pulled the fabric away. It was a body, but not flesh. Porcelain. Another effigy, this one cracked, burned at the edges, as if rejected. And beside it, bones. Small, curled, clutching a comb identical to the one on her dressing table. She gasped, then choked. There, etched at the base of the bed, was a name. Yan Yu, her grandmother. Footsteps behind her. She turned. No one. But on the wall behind her, symbols began to glow, a script she had never learned, yet understood. The vow is not broken when the bride dies. It is broken when the bloodline ends. The blood continues, therefore the feast must too. She staggered backward, nearly collapsing. She had to leave. She turned to climb the stairs, and the hatch slammed shut. Darkness swallowed everything. Then, a single light appeared. At the foot of the bed, he was sitting there, the man in red. His veil was gone, and his smile was wider than before. "Welcome home," he said. "You found your place. You found your purpose." She tried to scream, but her throat closed. He didn't touch her. He didn't move. He only whispered, "It's time to lie down." She collapsed. Whether from fear, exhaustion, or the blood charm etched into her arms, she didn't know. The last thing she saw was the porcelain bride opening her eyes and smiling. Yanlin woke in her bed, in her house, the hatch gone, floor repaired, but the red threads were now wrapped tightly around her ankles, tied in wedding knots. And her mouth tasted of wax again. Yanlin couldn't swallow without pain now. Not because her throat was sore, but because something was there, nestled beneath her tongue. Something small and hard. She stood before the mirror trembling and opened her mouth wide. At first, she saw nothing but red, irritated gums, a swollen tongue, the shadow of exhaustion in every part of her. Then, as she tilted her head, it glinted, a speck of porcelain, no larger than a seed, wedged beneath the flesh. She reached in with shaking fingers and touched it. It moved. And in her skull, a voice whispered, The vow must take root. She screamed, or tried to, but it came out wrong, choked, warped, like a voice buried under water. She fell to the floor, coughing until she gagged. What came out wasn't blood. It was thread. A thin red thread, soaked and warm, like something pulled from a deeper place than her stomach. She dropped it on the floor. It slithered on its own before curling into a knot, a wedding knot. Her mouth burned, her lips stung. She staggered to the altar and saw the porcelain groom was gone. Only ashes remained where he once sat, and etched into the wood where his feet had been, the bride must carry the groom. She tore through the house, bookshelves, cabinets, closets, every page that had once held recipes, family records, or Taoist prayers now bore the same script. Not Chinese, not Latin, but something older, angular, circular. She could read it somehow. The body is the vessel, the tongue is the lock, the bride is the door. Yanlin collapsed, hands over her ears, but the words were inside her, echoing now. Chanted, by children, by elders, by her own mother's voice. When the teeth are beneath the tongue, the promise is nearly full. That night, she dreamed again. This time, she was not in the village. She stood in a temple carved from bone and lantern light, ceiling draped in red silk. All around her were faceless brides, lined shoulder to shoulder, swaying in rhythm. Their mouths were sealed, their bellies were round. Yanlin looked down and saw her own stomach swelling. Inside, something moved. The man in red stood at the altar, hands behind his back, teeth gleaming like polished lacquer. You carry him well. He grows with silence. She screamed, or tried to, but it came out wrong. Choked, warped, like a voice buried under water. One bride turned to her and opened her mouth. Dozens of red teeth spilled out. Yanlin woke, gagging, her mouth full of something solid. She ran to the sink, retching, coughing until her chest tore. She spat it out. A tooth. Porcelain, but warm. It spun in the basin on its own, like it was breathing. She smashed it with the faucet. It cracked. Inside, red thread. Still moving. The next day, the villagers began preparing the pavilion. Not a funeral this time. A wedding. Chairs lined the square. A canopy was raised from the oldest trees. Fireworks were stacked neatly in boxes, sealed with gold characters. Yanlin watched from her window as the children carried folded paper birds, crimson and white, tied to sticks. One landed on her porch. She picked it up. Written beneath its wings, "The groom walks at dusk, the bride will follow." The sky darkened instantly, too fast, as if the sun had been turned off, and the drums began again. But now, she could hear something beneath the drums. Chewing. Wet. Rhythmic. Echoing in her ears. Inside her mouth. Inside her blood. In desperation, she lit every candle in the house and returned to the place beneath the altar, the hatch now gone, replaced with a smooth, untouched floor. But the whispers remained. She fell to her knees and began carving symbols into the wood with a kitchen knife, trying to break the surface. As she cut, the symbols bled. Not the wood, the knife. The blade blackened. She dropped it, and from the cuts in the floor, teeth began to rise. small, porcelain, red. She ran, out of the house, into the night. The village square was glowing. Empty chairs faced an altar draped in crimson silk. A mirror hung above it, circular, ancient, fogged with steam from no source. She walked to it. Her reflection stared back, but her mouth was stitched, and her stomach moved, slow, pulsing. From within, something smiled and whispered, "You have carried me well, beloved."
The wedding feast was already being prepared when the morning light never came. Shuangxi woke under a false dawn, the sky a dull red-gray veil, the sun hidden behind something heavy and unmoving. The air smelled sweet, too sweet, like overripe fruit and blood. Yanlin stood at her window, unmoving. From here she could see it all. The tables had been arranged in a perfect circle around the village's ancient ginkgo tree. Silk runners embroidered with phoenixes fluttered between wooden bowls, and seated at each place setting, not villagers, but effigies, paper figures, men and women, children and elders, each dressed in celebratory red, each with no faces. She turned away, breath short. Her tongue ached, her throat itched, and deep inside her chest she felt it again, a twitch, a pulse, a motion that didn't belong to her. She hadn't eaten in days, and yet she wasn't hungry. Whatever was inside her was feeding on something else, something deeper. There was a knock on the door. She opened it slowly. Uncle Yao stood there, dressed in the full ceremonial robes of an elder, black silk trimmed with gold, a tall hat bearing the she character, and a quiet sadness in his eyes. "The feast begins soon," he said. She said nothing. "You're not being punished, you're being honored," he continued. She stared at him. Her voice, hoarse but steady, finally broke through the dryness of her throat. "You're all insane." Uncle Yao lowered his head. "No, just afraid." He stepped forward and placed a box in her hands, long, flat, wrapped in red cloth. She didn't want to open it, but she did. Inside, a knife, ceremonial, curved, old. And next to it, a red thread tied around a lock of her own hair. "We prepare the feast, but the bride must serve the first course," Uncle Yao said softly. Yanlin recoiled. He nodded slowly. "The first cut comes from the bloodline, always." She ran again, out through the back door, past the smiling villagers who didn't move, didn't speak, didn't breathe, just stood and stared. She made it to the riverbank before collapsing. There, at the water's edge, she found Lifen, still barefoot, still pale, but this time she was smiling. A real smile, no stitches, no wax, just sorrow. "You're almost there," Lifen said softly. "Please," Yanlin begged, "help me." "I tried, but once it's in your blood, it doesn't stop, not until the vow is complete." "I didn't agree to any of this." Lifen's eyes were glassy. "You were born agreeing." Yanlin felt the movement again, inside her, worse now, like fingers pressing outward from behind her ribs. "He's waking," Lifen whispered. "Who is he?" But Lifen didn't answer. She only lifted her hand and pointed to the reflection in the river. Yanlin looked. Her face shimmered and changed. Her eyes bled red at the edges. Her teeth had multiplied, just a little, just enough. The feast began at dusk, not with drums, but with silence, total, smothering. The villagers gathered around the tables, still smiling,
Still unmoving, each held a bowl, each filled with red broth. Yan Lin was led by two girls in crimson veils to the head of the table, where a seat carved from bone awaited. She didn't want to sit, but her knees gave out. The moment she touched the chair, the villagers lifted their bowls in unison, but they didn't drink. They waited for her. A covered tray sat in front of her, ceremonial, gold-lined, breathing. She reached forward with trembling hands and lifted the lid. Inside, a tooth, one of hers, still warm, still pulsing. Beside it, a wax seal and a note written in red. To begin the binding, swallow what you are. She stood, backed away, but the villagers began humming, low, droning, a sound without melody, but heavy with pressure. The ground vibrated beneath her feet. The ginkgo tree shook. Lanterns flared to life, though no fire touched them. The tray shook. The tooth moved, closer to her. And somewhere beneath the feast, beneath the roots, beneath the bones of the land, he chewed. Soft, wet, closer. Yan Lin fell to her knees. The humming grew louder. Her mouth opened against her will. She tried to scream, but her tongue no longer obeyed, and the tooth rose into the air, hovered, pressed gently against her lips. Then it forced itself inside. She swallowed, not because she chose to, because the bride obeys. When it was done, the humming stopped. The villager stood and clapped, soundless, motionless. She sat, shaking, and in her chest a voice laughed. The first course was delightful. Now, my bride, come lie down.
They say when a smile is too wide, it stops meaning joy. It becomes something else. A warning, a wound, a mask. Yan Lin hadn't stopped smiling in over an hour, not because she wanted to, but because her face would no longer relax. The muscles were pulled taut, the corners of her mouth fixed upward in a grotesque expression of celebration. It hurt, her cheeks throbbed, her jaw ached, her lips cracked. But no matter how hard she tried to force it away, the smile stayed. She sat in her childhood room, staring into the old mirror, the same one her mother had once covered with red cloth after her grandmother died. Now it reflected something else. Her. And not her. The woman in the mirror wore the same robe, held the same posture, but her smile was wider. Her eyes were empty, and behind her, always just out of focus, stood the man in red, teeth gleaming like polished lacquer. He never blinked, he never moved, but she felt his breath on the back of her neck whenever she looked too long. That evening, Uncle Yao returned. He didn't knock, he simply entered, holding a folded length of silk and a small lacquered box. "It's time," he said. She didn't ask what for. She already knew. He set the box in front of her and opened it slowly. Inside, the red wax seal, a brush, a brass stamp in the shape of a mouth, and a vial of black liquid. Ink, maybe, or blood, or both. "I won't let you," she whispered. "You already have," he replied. She tried to run, but the village was ready. Lanterns followed her. They moved on their own, floating, drifting like glowing insects, herding her back toward the center of the square. She pushed through alleyways, past paper brides hanging from balconies, their heads tilted at unnatural angles. One turned to look at her and smiled. The same smile she wore now, wide,
silent, pained. Yanlin ducked into the herbalist's shop, slamming the door behind her. It hadn't changed in years. Rows of hanging roots, bundles of dried flowers, the scent of ginseng and rot. But someone had drawn symbols across the walls, dozens of them, in charcoal and blood. They writhed faintly when she looked directly at them. A prayer? A trap? Or a welcome? At the far end of the room stood Li Fen. Her mouth was open now, too wide. Her lips split at the corners. Her teeth were wrong, too many, too sharp, too red. "Do you see it now?" Li Fen asked. Her voice echoed in Yanlin's mind rather than her ears. "This is what we become." Yanlin backed away. "I'm not like you." Li Fen smiled again. "Not yet." She turned, and in the mirror behind her, Yanlin saw her own face change. The smile widened, the eyes dimmed, and from the sides of her gums, new teeth emerged. She fled into the street, breath ragged, mouth locked in that awful grin. Villagers stood in perfect rows holding candles that didn't flicker. At the far end of the road, a procession had begun. Red robes, ceremonial drums, and at its head, the man in red. He didn't walk, he glided. Lanterns swirled around him like moths. In his hand he held a veil, crimson, stained with wax. He lifted it toward her, and from behind the fabric came that voice, his voice. "You've already said yes. All you must do now is smile. Smile for me, beloved." Yanlin turned and ran toward the shrine, not the public one, but the secret shrine behind her family home, where the hatch had once opened, where her grandmother had once been buried alive with porcelain and wax. She fell to her knees, digging through dirt and ash, nails breaking, fingers blistering. At last, her hand struck wood. Not a coffin, but a chest. She pried it open. Inside, scrolls, blackened bones, and the talisman sealed in a jar of ash. She broke the glass and pulled it free. It pulsed in her hand, warm, alive, humming. She pressed it to her chest, and for a moment, the smile cracked, just slightly. Enough for a single breath, a scream. It tore from her throat, guttural and desperate, the first real sound she had made in days. And the village heard. The lights flickered, the drums stopped, and from far away, a shriek echoed across the mountains, old, monstrous, and angry. The smile vanished from her face, and in its place, a scream, one that didn't stop. They say weddings are meant to be seen, to be shared, to be blessed by family, by friends, by laughter and light. But Yanlin's wedding was not meant for the living, and there would be no witnesses, only watchers, only silence, only teeth. The village square had transformed overnight. The ginkgo tree was now draped entirely in red silk. Candles floated mid-air, unlit yet glowing. The tables from the feast had vanished, replaced by a single aisle carved into the dirt, with rows of empty chairs on either side, all facing a platform built of black stone. There were no guests, only effigies. Hundreds of paper people sat with perfect posture, heads bowed, hands folded. Each bore no face, only an empty oval where eyes and mouths should be. At the end of the aisle stood the altar, carved in the shape of a wedding bed, and above it, the porcelain groom, reassembled, whole, smiling, waiting. Yanlin stood in front of the mirror in her family's dressing room. Her reflection swayed in slow motion. The red wedding robe was on her body. She didn't remember putting it on. Her hair had been braided into a traditional bridal knot. Pins shaped like bats and flowers pierced her scalp. A red veil hung from her head, brushing the floor like a shroud. She didn't remember how it happened. The wax seal was once again on her lips, warm, soft, holding her voice captive. She hadn't put it there. It simply appeared. Her body was no longer hers, but it obeyed because the vow had been accepted. The bloodline remembered. And the smile had returned, stretching gently beneath the wax. Uncle Yao waited at the door. His expression was blank. His hands trembled. He extended a crimson scroll, unrolling it before her, like an invitation. It read, "With this union, we return balance to the root. With this bride, we repay the betrayal. With silence, we honor the vow." No one spoke. The air itself felt sealed. He led her outside. The sky above Shuangxi was no longer a sky. It was a veil, low, heavy, red. Clouds hung like cloth soaked in blood, unmoving, pressed against the rooftops. Yanlin walked the aisle alone. Each step sunk slightly into the dirt, like the land was swallowing her willingly. The paper guests rustled faintly as she passed, as if breathing, watching, approving. When she reached the altar, she did not kneel. She didn't have to. Her body did it for her. The groom's porcelain hands opened on their own. He held a wax seal in one hand and a tooth in the other. Her tooth. She recognized it. Still cracked from when she tried to escape the dream. Still warm, still pulsing. The ceremony began. Unspoken words passed between invisible mouths. No priest, no chants, just air thick with ancestral breath. And then, the groom leaned forward. His mouth opened. Rows of red teeth gleamed beneath painted lips. He didn't kiss her. He breathed into her, and the wax seal melted. Yanlin gasped as the wax ran down her chin and onto her neck, where it formed a mark, the same symbol carved in the base of the altar. She. Double happiness. But it wasn't joy. It was possession. It was completion. The ground shook. The tree wept red leaves. And beneath the altar, something opened. A hole. A maw. A void carved into the earth, ringed with teeth made of bone and porcelain. And into it the bride descended, not by choice, but by design. The ground pulled her, the altar swallowed her, and as she disappeared into the blackness, every paper effigy in the square turned its head toward her and smiled. Down below, the air was thick with incense and ash. She stood once more on stone, the inner chamber of the buried shrine. The porcelain groom stood beside her now, taller, more solid, more real. He reached out, and in his palm, a heart, not bleeding, not human, but made of wax and thread wrapped tightly with red silk. He pressed it to her chest, and her body opened, not physically, not with blood, but with memory, with surrender, with a silence so vast it devoured thought. In that moment, Yanlin remembered every bride before her, her mother, her grandmother, her great-grandmother, each one walking the same path, each one smiling with sealed lips, each one devoured and reborn as a vessel for him. And she understood. The man in red was never just a spirit. He was the will of the village, the hunger of forgotten gods, the pact they had made with their guilt. He was tradition made monstrous, and she was the final offering, the last daughter of the line. Above, the drums resumed, but this time they played only one sound: chewing, soft, slow, satisfied.
Beneath the earth, where no sunlight reaches and no prayer dares echo, the wedding continued, not with music, not with vows, but with chewing, wet, rhythmic, relentless. The sound moved through the chamber walls like breath through lungs, not from one mouth, but from many, layered over one another, old and hungry, patient and pleased. Yanlin stood in a chamber of red stone, arms by her sides, feet bare, veil soaked with wax. She didn't remember walking. She didn't remember standing. She was simply there. The altar above had vanished. The hole had closed. No escape. Only a red curtain hung behind her, from ceiling to floor. Old silk embroidered with symbols too ancient to read, but too familiar not to feel. It pulsed with breath, and behind it, he chewed. She didn't look. She didn't have to. She knew. He was there. A voice rose in her mind, deep and slow. You are not the first. You are only the last. And soon you will be the mouth through which I rise again. She tried to move, to run, to scream, to kneel, to deny, but her body remained fixed, still wearing the red, still smiling, still stitched from the inside out with silk and silence. Then the curtain shifted, not as if moved by air. There was no air. But from behind, as if something enormous pressed against it. A shape, a form, him. The man no longer looked like a groom. He was taller, taller than human, taller than bone. His arms stretched and cracked, his fingers bent backward. His mouth was no longer a smile, but a wound made of spiraled teeth, clicking gently as he waited. And his voice came from everywhere. You wear the dress, you carry the seal, now carry me. The curtain split, not without tearing. It opened like skin, and from the darkness behind it, he stepped forward, but only partially. Just his hands, long, bone-pale, laced with red thread from fingertip to wrist. They reached toward her and stopped inches from her chest, waiting, not to grab, not to pull, but to be invited. Yanlin's throat burned, her jaw clenched. She could feel the wax returning, seeping upward, ready to silence her one final time. But then, a whisper, faint, different. He lied to us, too. It wasn't his voice, it was her mother's, coming not from outside, but from within, buried deep in the parts of her the ritual hadn't reached. Yanlin gasped. A thread snapped behind her eyes, her fingers twitched, and suddenly she remembered the old words, the ones her grandmother used to chant while cleaning the ancestral altar.
the ones her mother would murmur under her breath during storms. Protective Taoist scripture, not written, not learned, inherited. She opened her mouth, the wax cracked, and from her throat, broken and shaking, the words fell like stones. Return to the root from which you were twisted. Return to the dirt, O devourer of daughters. I do not carry you, I break you. I do not silence, I scream. The chamber shook, the red curtain burst into flame, the chewing stopped. Instantly. The hands recoiled, the voice howled, the teeth chattered in agony, and the ground began to pull itself inward, folding, cracking, screaming. Yanlin collapsed to her knees, breath ragged, blood running from her mouth, but her smile, for the first time, was hers. Twisted not by curse, but by rage, by defiance. And then from the burning silk, she saw a woman step forward. Her mother, younger, unburdened, smiling gently. She reached for Yanlin's hand. The line ends with you. You are the last bride. Now bury the bed. Yanlin rose. Around her the chamber was collapsing. The red light turned black. The chewing became shrieking. She ran, barefoot and burning, up the collapsing stairs that should not have existed, a spiral of stone turning into ash with every step. The tunnel sealed behind her. The floorboards cracked. The hatch returned. And then she was in her house, collapsed in the center of her family altar, dripping wax, bleeding thread, breathing, alive, alone. Outside, the lanterns had gone out, one by one. No smoke, no fire, just gone. The villagers vanished. No paper guests, no procession, no red canopy. The ginkgo tree was bare, no decorations, no faces, only wind, only quiet. She stood there for a long time, her fingers trembling, her heart still wrapped in silence. Then she looked down. In her palm, a tooth, red, still warm, still watching.
Dawn came, but it brought no color, no sun, no light. Only a pale gray sky stretched thin like skin over bone. The village of Shuangxi was silent. Not the ritual silence of before, the waxen hush, the smiling stillness, but the silence of emptiness. Yanlin walked barefoot through the center of town. Her road, once crimson and clean, now torn and ash-streaked, dragged behind her like a shed skin. There were no footsteps except hers, no music, no drums, no mouths to feed the hunger. The village had emptied itself like a fruit peeled too deeply, and yet she remained. The bride who hadn't been devoured, the bride who had bitten back. At the ginkgo tree, the ground had split, a blackened scar in the shape of a mouth, now closed with soot and cracked stone. Its roots were charred, its lanterns had turned to ash. Beneath it, buried somewhere deep, lay the altar bed that had cradled generations of girls and generations of teeth. Yanlin didn't weep. She had no tears left, only fire. Back at her mother's house, the altar had collapsed. The porcelain groom lay shattered on the floor. No blood, no thread, just hollow clay. A husk of a god too long worshipped, too long fed. On the walls, the red charms had peeled and fallen, and her mirror, the one she had avoided for days, had cracked clean down the middle. She looked anyway. Her smile was gone.
But her eyes were not the same. They were still hers, but they remembered. On the table lay the knife her uncle had given her, still ceremonial, still curved, still heavy with purpose. She picked it up, and for a moment, her reflection held it differently than she did, almost lovingly. But she blinked, and it was gone. Just herself, tired, marked, alive. There was one thing left to do, one promise left to break, one chain left to cut. She walked back to the old shrine behind the house, the place where the blood had been sealed, the place where the root of the vow still pulsed, unseen. There, buried beneath the ashes, she found it, a lacquered box sealed with wax and thread, her grandmother's offering, her mother's curse. Inside, tokens from every generation, hair, bone, seals, teeth. Red, polished, carefully stored, dozens of them, the true dowry, the legacy of obedience. Yanlin stared at them for a long time, then whispered, "No more." She carried them to the fire pit, lit every wax seal she could find, burned the thread, shattered the teeth one by one with the curved blade until nothing remained but dust. The box screamed when it burned, not with sound, but with memory, with pain, with the long echo of swallowed daughters finally let loose. The flames didn't rise, they sank, drawn downward, pulled into the earth as though the land itself was choking on truth. And when the final ember died, the wind returned, clean, empty, alive. That night she dreamt again, but not of the man in red, not of porcelain grooms or bone beds. This dream was silent and free. She stood in a field beyond the village, barefoot in grass, her robe turned white with moonlight, and behind her a woman stood, her mother, younger, whole, unafraid. "You ended it," her mother said. "You did what I couldn't." Yanlin turned to her. "It cost everything." Her mother nodded. "But it gave something too. A daughter who will never wear wax." She woke with sunlight on her face, real sunlight, warm, soft, ordinary. She rose, dressed, packed nothing, and walked away from Shuangxi. The road was open now. The trees did not block her. The lanterns were gone, and for the first time since she was a girl, there was no one smiling behind her, no one watching, no one chewing. Just her, just wind, just footsteps leading forward.
The city was louder than she remembered, not in noise, but in rhythm. Yanlin had returned to a world of cars and glass towers, blinking crosswalks, and voices too busy to carry meaning. The air smelled of oil and coffee, not incense and wax. No one bowed when she passed, no one smiled without reason. It should have felt safe, it should have felt real, but the silence in her ears had learned to wait, and the red string still lingered. Her apartment was small, clean, modern, no ginkgo trees outside, no altars, just one window that faced the skyline, where she sat every night with tea she no longer sweetened. A month had passed since she left Shuangxi, since she burned the groom. The village never made the news. There were no missing persons reports.
No satellite photos of ruins, no trace of the red-lit streets, the paper effigies, the chewing beneath the soil, as if it had never existed at all, as if it had been made for her and died with her escape. But she knew better. Some things are not undone, they are only buried. It started on her 29th birthday, a letter, no return address. Inside, a single thread of red silk and a comb, identical to the one from her wedding chest, still warm, still humming. She threw it away, burned the envelope, flushed the thread. But that night she woke to find a red lantern hanging outside her window. It wasn't there before. She lived on the 15th floor, no balcony, no hook, just floating, waiting, watching. She didn't open the window, she didn't touch it. By morning it was gone, but her pillow held strands of red thread, and her lips tasted faintly of wax. She kept moving, changed apartments, changed jobs, changed her name. But the red followed. Not every day, just enough. A shadow at the edge of a mirror, a whisper in a stranger's laugh, a silk knot in a child's braid. Sometimes she would hear the drums faintly in the plumbing, slow, soft, distant. Boom, boom, boom. And worse, sometimes she would dream of children, tiny girls in red veils, smiling, singing lullabies that ended in chewing. She told no one. She tried to forget, but the body does not forget what the soul survives. And deep inside her chest, she still felt something threaded. Not possession, not him, but memory. Memory shaped like teeth. And on some nights, when the world was too quiet, she would open her mouth in the mirror and count. Still 32, still human, but one of them, back left, second molar, glinted faintly red, only under moonlight, only when she whispered, "I do." One spring morning, a little girl knocked on her door, hair in braids, shoes too big, holding a box wrapped in red paper. Yanlin froze. "Who gave that to you?" The girl shrugged. "It was on your doormat. I just brought it up." "What's your name?" "Xu Ying." Yanlin's stomach twisted. That was her grandmother's name. The girl tilted her head. "Are you getting married?" Yanlin didn't answer. The girl smiled. "You look like a bride." She left. Yanlin didn't open the box. She buried it, deep, far. But that night she dreamed again of her daughter, unborn, unnamed, wearing red, holding a comb. And from the darkness the voice returned, older, hungrier, patient. Blood remembers, strings tangle, teeth return. The curse was not broken, only delayed. She had ended the feast, but the hunger was older than the village, older than language, and it knew how to wait. So now, every year, on the anniversary of her wedding, the wedding with no witnesses, she prepares. She lights no candles, she wears no red. She leaves her door locked, her mirrors covered, and her mouth shut. And still, the lantern comes, and still, the threads return. But she no longer fears them, because she has learned something deeper than survival. She has learned resistance. She has learned ritual, not to feed the spirit, but to warn it, because now she has teeth too.